Hi everyone, it's Andrea Haas from Elm Tree Education, and I'm back with another Lit Bits segment where I answer teachers submitted questions about literacy instruction in just a little bit. As always, if you have a question to submit, don't forget to do so, and I'll show that link again at the end. Okay, we're going to mix it up the next actually 3 weeks. I tried very hard to get this topic into one Lit Bit segment, but it's just too big, just too meaty, just too much. So it's going to end up being spread out through the rest of November. So we'll do part 1 today, and then next week will be part 2, and then the week after that will be part 3. So over that time, though, I'm going to spend some time discussing some of the misconceptions that folks may have about the science of reading. This is based off of questions I received, not just one in particular, but just a few that kind of the way they were phrased made me curious, as if there might be some myths out there that are floating around about really what the science of reading truly is. And also, I think just in general, there's a lot of information coming at folks from social media, from the regular news media, and they're not always filtered through what is the true science, and then that kind of then leads to all these misconceptions and confusion. So yeah, we're switching it up. We're going to do just the first part today, and then we'll get to the rest of them the next 2 weeks. Okay, so let's dig in. The first misconception really is about what the science of reading actually is. Many times when people are saying science of reading, they're doing it on almost synonymously with phonics. That is not what it is. It's also not a curriculum. And it's not something that is a specific program that you buy, or a methodology that you might use, or some sort of philosophy that you have about teaching. It's truly the actual research that folks from many different disciplines have done about how we learn to read, and also why kids might struggle, because that's been a real high topic of interest. I know some people throw around the term like reading crisis. We've been in this reading crisis for a while. This is not like a new thing. There just happens to be like a new spotlight on that research. So there have been some improvements. I also think when we talk about crisis, like, we're not talking about some of the positives. There has been some improvements, but unfortunately, there is a group of our readers out there who aren't seeing the improvements and gains that we would hope. And that's why people have been digging in. So people from education, special education, cognitive psychology, communication sciences, developmental psychology, linguistics, and neurology, right? That's kind of where some of this stuff started, was some of the knowledge that we have about maybe kids who have dyslexia, for example. And then like what really is different about their brains versus somebody else's brain who is more successful at becoming proficient to read with typical instruction. So anyway, I've heard a lot of people say this in some different ways to try to kind of like separate the science from what's happening in the culture. I've heard people say the sciences, like S plural of reading, because it's multidisciplinary. I've also heard some folks use the descriptor that this is the science of reading movement, because there is a movement that is happening across the country. But one thing I just want to really be clear about is when researchers are doing their studies, they have a question that they're trying to answer, right? Or they have a hypothesis that they're trying to see if they can prove it right. And so when they do these studies, they want to figure out, and they do want to contribute to the knowledge that we have. Again, that bank-wide variety, vast body of research that we have. They want to contribute to that. But where I think the breakdown happens is sometimes that research does not clearly translate to classroom practice. There's been really very little research that has been done about how would you take something that has been done in a laboratory with 3 kids and then translate that to a classroom where there's like 30 kids. And then we don't know all of the things that you can't control in a classroom like you can for a controlled study. So there's just too much unpredictability there, right? In the classroom versus in a laboratory. So sometimes what we see as should be a direct correlation has lost the nuance of what happens. And really researchers, they're not, nor do they feel like, I don't feel like they feel like they're equipped to advise teachers about how they should be teaching. They're just telling us what are these research implications. And then the problem is that we have these research implications and then it's the translation to practice that is where things are breaking down, right? So I think that's becoming really more and more apparent in the research community. And I think they're trying to bridge some gaps there between research and practice. For goodness sakes, we don't know, what's the effective use of your minutes in your instructional day? Where should you be concentrating your efforts? And is one particular way or method or program more successful than another? We really don't have that information. So hopefully that'll be something that's coming. And that's the other bit too, is that science is always evolving. That's what it does. That's the point, right? Whenever we have new learning, then we take that in and add it to what we already know to be true. And so for some folks, there's been a lot of sides, right? The reading wars that have been going on for a long time about it. But really, it's just we're all trying to get to the same goal, which is we want kids to be able to read. And they need that. That's all I'll say about misconception number 1. Number 2. Here's another misconception. If I've got a kiddo that is struggling to read, especially one who's in the upper grades, 4th, even 3rd, but 4th and 5th grade, okay? At this point in time, from some of the conversations, the information that I'm seeing online, it seems as if many folk think that if a child is struggling, we must focus on the foundation skills. Now, for some kids, that's 100% true. But for other kids, they are not actually struggling with word recognition. They might be struggling with background knowledge, or they might be struggling with some executive functioning skills, or they might be struggling with fluency. There's so many other things to reading. It is so complex, which is why we are still having this discussion. We still have reading wars after all of these years because it is so complex and too many things depend on other things in the brain for you to pull print off the page as a proficient reader. So the one thing I will say is, yes, there has one of the consequences of this movement, not in a negative way consequence, but one of the effects, I guess, of this movement has been kind of like a refocusing on foundational skills. Okay, wait, but we really should not do this willy-nilly. This is not like just throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks. We should have a systematic way that we are teaching these phonemes and then giving kids the tools so that they can decode words on their own when they're not around another adult to support them if they get stuck, right? So we know that we can't throw bits and pieces at kids and just hope that it's going to work, right? That they're going to just connect the dots. But we also know that not all kids are struggling with the same things. And so while all kids are going to benefit from the principles of how language works and some systematic phonics instruction, especially in those beginning early years, not every kid is going to need to have the same emphasis placed on those skills. So it really does have to be individualized. I've heard a lot of like, well, this is just good instruction for anybody, or it's not going to hurt anybody to do X, Y, and Z structured literacy program. And that's true. And again, when you're at the beginning stages, when you are an emergent reader, of course, that's kind of where you're spending your time on, because they can't do the other things, the fluency, the comprehension, if they can't actually pull the print off the page. Like, we know that. Now, what we also know is that it has to be tied to meaning. So the other thing that I'm seeing a lot of is a lot of really siloed foundational skills work, when it really shouldn't be taught at the expense of stories and doing it in context. And I feel like from everything I'm reading, researchers across the board with different specialties from different disciplines are saying, like, you can't just pull apart all these aspects of literacy. They really need to be integrated. And so when we think about foundational skills, obviously our goal is reading. And so our instruction, anything that we're doing is advancing that goal to get kids to read. But you can't just cherry pick or check off boxes and say that you are doing systematic instruction, over here, but then what's happening when you actually ask them to read books is something completely separate. It's got to be connected. Otherwise, it doesn't have a lot of meaning. I'll also say that, while I've heard some folks say that phonemic awareness should be, is just oral, it's just sounds. You could do it blindfolded. Yes, and it actually needs to be connected to text. Like, the kids need to see those letter sound relationships. So yeah, we can do some rhyming, and we can do some of those segmenting and blending of sounds, but then also like show the kids how that connects to like the actual printed letters. Yeah. The other bit too is there is no like checklist or like prerequisite that you must have gone through all of these phonemes and 100 some spelling rules before you can read. Like, there isn't some like predetermined prereqs that you have to have. Like, again, it's got to happen at the same time. Some folks have been talking about how, kids, they first need to know their phonemic awareness, and then you can talk about phonics, and then you might talk about morphemes, and then you might talk about etymology, like whatever. That's not true. Really, we should be doing it. What's age appropriate and based on the child's progress appropriate all the way through. Those things should be connected all the way through, because that's how the brain works. It doesn't put things in silos, and our kids don't put things in silos. Like, they don't see them as separate things unless you make it seem like it's in separate things, where you say, okay, now we're going to do our phonics practice, and now we're going to do our comprehension practice, and now we're going to write about something else completely different than what we've been talking about over here. Like, that's the part for all kids that really needs to be emphasized, is these strong connections, making it relevant, like getting how big it is and why you need all these pieces, and that your brain, when you're a proficient reader, is really doing so many things at once to pull the print off the page. Yeah, I think that's where I'll stop there for today. So, lots of stuff, but we're going to continue this next week, and so I'll get into some other misconceptions next week. But I would love to hear any other thoughts that you might have on those two, about, just people thinking science of reading is like a curriculum or a program or a method, or and that it's against another method, and like they're at war. It's not true. It's a body of research. So I would love to hear your thoughts. So please find me on social media and comment. Also, if you, again, have another literacy question after I get through these 3 weeks, I have a few more kind of lined up, ready to go. But then after that, I'm starting to run out of questions. So I would love to hear from you of any other literacy questions that are coming up in your classroom, or maybe from something I've said that makes you want to know a little more, so I can go a little deeper on any of the topics that I've kind of just lightly touched on so far in my segments. All right. See, this is still 15 minutes, even though I only did a third. That's because your pal Andrea wants to make sure you have all the information, and I feel very passionately about this topic. Okay, so until next time, I hope that you're taking care of yourself and celebrating those successes as you see them. All right.